Are you a new non-profit? Is this the first time that you are seeking grants? If the answer to any or both of those questions is yes, then this session is specifically for you. Now, the reason for this is that there is one assumption, one common one assumption that it's like I've noticed that every new non-profit I talk to, they tend to have this one assumption, and that is what I want to address it today, so that you don't make the mistake of going around with your grant process with this assumption in your mind. Now, what is this assumption? This assumption is that grant money is free money. So this is what I've noticed is new non-profit and non-profit which are looking to get into grants. Notice that they have this assumption that grant money is free money. And now, because grant money is free money, they can use the money, they can use the grant money, they can spend the grant money at the place. So that is the biggest assumption that I've seen in non-profit. And the reason this is an assumption is that in my 5 years of in grant writing, I've noticed that this is not true. And now, if you go around with this assumption in mind and you just spend the grant money freely as you wish, what happens is that it brings problems for your nonprofit. Now, the first problem it brings is that your nonprofit is blacklisted. So that is one of the things that the grantors that awarded you the grant end up blacklisting your nonprofit. The second problem that comes up is that you may still get a grant, but you will get tighter restrictions on how you are operating your nonprofit. So it will be very tight for your nonprofit in how you can spend the grant. So that is the second thing that can happen. And now with this second one, it is more about the audit and the compliance check-ins. So in case you use the grant in a way that is not you are not supposed to use it, what happens is that these compliance check-ins end up being very rigorous. And now, the other thing is about the audit. When they audit your non-profit, it end up being very rigorous. And now, you don't want that for your non-profit. The other thing is that when you have done this same thing that you have thought that it's free money with federal or state grants, it can end up being extremely costly for your non-profit. And it's because you will end up in this legal mess whereby at the end of the day you may end up being forced to repay the grant. So that is the final problem that you can come across. That's because you assumed that grant money is free money. Now I will get to what to do about this in a few moments. So right now I'd like to welcome you to this session and the third session of your Lead Experience Podcast, Second Edition. So, in this podcast, what I do is that every week I share one thing that you can do in your nonprofit, that you can do in your grant process, that you can do in your grant strategy, so that you increase the chances of your nonprofit securing grants. So that is the whole purpose of this podcast. And now, in case you don't know me, I am Samuel Kim, the founder and CEO of NK Elite. NK Elite is an agency that focuses on only two things, and that is first one is marketing, and then the second one is fundraising. Now, let's get back, let's get back to the assumption. So, as I already mentioned, grant money is not free money. So now the question is, if grant money is not free money, what is grant money? Grant money is financial support for specific work in a specific project for a specific period. So those three must be there: specific work for a specific project in a specific period. So that is what grant money is. So when you go around looking for grant, you should know that grant is specifically for something. And now, as you have noticed, there's this thing that many fundraising consultants say, and this is that grants are restricted funding. So what that means is that you cannot spend grants just as you wish. You cannot just take the grant money and spend it just as you want to spend it. Like when now you have like major donor program, so you can use major donor program for what you want to do with it. But for grant money, it for specifically, it's very specific. So it's for specific work in a specific project for a specific period. So those three specifics must be there. Now, as I've already mentioned, grant money is very specific. And now, for every grant that you ever come across, it will have those three specific. So it will be for specific work in a specific project that aligns with the priorities of the grantor and for a specific period. So this specific period can be 6 months, can be 12 months, can be 24 months, can be 36 months, or even sometimes it can be longer. It can be even be for 60 months. So 60 months is 5 years. So that grant will go for that long. So that is what grants are specifically for. And now, when you use grant for the right thing, what ends up happening is that you keep open future funding opportunities from the same grantor. The second thing is that you keep your reputation intact. So you keep your reputation that you are a non-profit, which when you are awarded a grant, you spend grant as you have agreed to spend the grant. And the final thing is that you avoid a legal mess. As I've mentioned with the state and the federal grant, what ends up happening when you spend the grant money in a way that was not approved to spend the grant money, you will end up being sued. And now in that, you can even end up being asked to repay the grant. So you can avoid that legal mess by spending grant money in only the approved expenses. So that's the first thing about grant, that grant money for specific work, for specific project in a specific period. The second thing about grant that you need to understand is that a grant is an agreement between you and the grantor. So when you apply for a grant, you are agreeing to you are agreeing that your nonprofit will be subjected to the guidelines and the requirements that the grantor has for that specific grant. So it is an agreement between you and the nonprofit and the grantor. And now in this agreement, there are terms. So like every agreement, as you know, there are terms for the agreement. And now, so there are things that you must do as a nonprofit so that you can qualify for that grant and so that you maintain your reputation with that specific funder. Now, one of these things is that, like, I can give you three examples of three things that a funder may require of your organization. So the first one is community involvement. So this is when a grantor wants to know whether the community in which you serve do you involve them in your impact work? The second thing is sustainability. So sustainability is about what happens after the grant period ends. So let's say that you have a grant that is going for 24 months. So the grantor want to know what plans do you have with the project after those 24 months. So 2 years later, they want to know how will you fund the project? How will you ensure that what the fund that has started will continue? And how will you ensure that the project will not just continue, but it will even be bigger and better and serving more people. So that is what sustainability is about. And now the other thing about grants is that there are grants which require reporting. So reporting is when now you write a report to the grantor. So it's like you update the grantor on what is going on with your project. So for example, I have used 24 months grant. So for the 24-month grant, you might find that maybe you are required to report 2 times. So after every 12 months, you are supposed to write a grant report and submit it to the grantor. So in this grant report is where now you will explain what you have done in the grant, what problems you have solved, and what impact you have achieved with that grant. And now the opportunities that you see to scale in that grant. So that is what the grant report is about. And those are the just three examples of the terms that a grantor may ask you to abide by. The thing about grants that you need to realize is that grants are very specific to that specific grantor. So what that means is that every grant is different. So every grant has a specific amount, it has specific guidelines, it has specific requirements, and it also for specific organizations. So you have to realize that. So it's not just about going out there and applying for every grant you see. No, you have to make sure that you are the right organization, your project comes within the project amount that the grantor is funding, and your the priorities of your project and your nonprofit are aligned with the priorities of the grantor with that specific grant. The other thing about grants is that you have to make sure that you submit it before the deadline. So don't wait until after the deadline. That is when you are submitting the grant. No, you have to submit the grant before the deadline comes. So if the deadline is like 1st July, you must submit it today. So let's say if the deadline was tomorrow, you have to submit it today. And now what we recommend at NK Lite is that you should submit the grant at least 1 week before the deadline. So that is the thing about grants. And as you have seen through this episode, you have noticed that grant money is not free money. So that is an assumption that you need to take out of your mind, that grant money is not free money, but grant money is financial support for specific work, for a specific project, and for a specific period. So that is the thing about grant. And as I've already mentioned, you must spend the grant that you have been awarded for the for only the approved expenses. And the reason for this is that so that you can secure future funding opportunities, so that when that grant has another grant in the future, you can apply for that other grant, and your chances of getting it are very high because they have already awarded you one grant. So very easy for them to continue funding your project. The other reason to spend only on approved expenses is that added the grant, you spend the grant on what you have agreed with the grantor to spend the grant on. And then the third and final thing of why you must spend the